All right, let's move on to the ECRA report.
So I'll ask that Assistant Principal for Curriculum and Instruction come up in case there are questions for her as well. But during the last ECRA presentation, I sensed that there was some frustration on the reports provided, and as a result, we modified the reports that were presented in addition to providing an additional report. So first, there was a clerical error on both sides, both ours and ECRA's, and there was some data missing on the last report that we presented at a previous board meeting. And so that information has been corrected and will be reflected in one of the reports tonight. And second, I wanted to stress that ECRA's primary role is not creating board reports for us, but rather it's to provide individual information on student growth. And so I wanted to take some time to share a new handout to illustrate how we use ECRA at the building level so that you can get a full sense of what ECRA does for us. Also, I want to note that in April or May, ECRA will be able to share what's called an adjusted status report, and that will compare our performance and demographics to the top 10 schools in Illinois, which are based off of composite ACT score. So with that background information, I'd like to begin with the Epass report that you've seen at the previous board meeting. And the report of this report format has stayed the same. And so if you look on page 18, overall the format of the report has 3 different types of graphs for the composite score and then each subject score. So on page 18 of the board packet is the first report. And this report gives average Explore, Plan, and ACT scores and EPAS growth for the graduating classes of 2010 through 2016. So you can see that EPAS growth ranges anywhere from 5.1 points to 6.6 points of growth. And this page shows all students. And if you look on page 19, this information only contains that of the transfer students. And as you can see, these students come in often at around, what our students come in from the class as a whole. But as you can see, they don't grow as much as our students do as a whole. So for example, if you just look at the last class, the class of 2016, on page 18, that class as a whole grew 5.1 points. But on page 19, if we're just looking at our students that come from our transfer or don't come from our feeder schools, their growth for EPAS was 2.0 points. And this is something that is consistent across all subject areas as well, if you flip through the report.
Krista, quick question for you. Obviously, the makeup of the class varies as far as the scores, as you can tell all the way along base intelligence just by the luck of the draw. But the year that we had a 6.6% growth, that looks remarkable compared to the other years. Have we looked at that to try to figure out what happened that year? I mean, why were we so successful? Or does it mean we have more people from our feeder schools and less transfers?
So any year which we either have a significant amount of growth or a significant amount of achievement, even the class of 2015 that had a 23.3, you can see usually the transfer students do much better that year. And the transfer student population ranges anywhere from about 50 to 70 students or so. And so that's usually what seems to have, just on the surface level from this report, an impact on the overall score. And so one thing, as we go through the next set of graphs that you'll see is we need to start doing some research on our transfer student group as a whole, and really start to identify, are all transfer students not growing as much as they should? Are there a specific set of transfer students? Is it dependent on the year in which they come to RB? Is it dependent upon the courses in which they take at RB? What courses are they taking? All of those things we need to start to look at, and this data kind of highlights the importance of doing that. So that's our next steps after we've looked at this data. If you look at page 20.
Well, in one sense, you would expect the transfer students' growth not to be as much, right? Because they're coming in sophomore, junior, or senior year, right? The transfer students.
That was much
Not
time.
necessarily, dependent on their average Explore score. Sometimes their average Explore score is higher than our
Right.
average Explore score for the entire class. So
That's-
you would expect those students to still be able to grow significantly.
And our largest group of transfers are usually in the freshman class?
We have a significant number of students that transfer in their freshman year.
How are they a transfer if they're coming in freshman year?
Because they're considered a transfer.
If
because
they don't
do
come
not
through the
from one of
feeder
our
schools?
3 main feeder schools.
Okay.
Got it.
If you look at page 20, so this chart and the next chart looks at percent of students meeting benchmarks, so either Explore, Plan, or ACT benchmarks. As you can see, the percent meeting benchmarks varies from class to class, and in the last 3 years, we've had a few less students meeting the ACT benchmark compared to the 8th grade Explore benchmark. And again, I think there's 2 reasons for that. One is the 8th grade Explore benchmark is just a prediction of whether or not students will be able to meet the grade 11 ACT benchmark. And then the other reason is if you look at the transfer information on those years, they're significantly lower. So for example, again, looking at page 20 on the board report, the class of 2016 for transfer students came in with 66.7% of students meeting benchmarks for Explore, but then 43% of students met benchmarks for ACT. And then the next set of graphs is on page 22. And on page 22 is the mean gain chart, which you have seen before. The difference in this chart compared to the previous chart is we took off the suburban sample. And we took off the suburban sample because it wasn't representative of the schools that we typically compare ourselves to. So that sample didn't have comparable demographics or composite ACT score. However, this information is still very beneficial for us as a school because for us it helps us identify, and it's a consistent pattern through each subject area, is the students that are just below the benchmark are not growing as much as the other students or meeting the expected growth. So for us, that means we need to begin to explore, one, identifying who those students are, what courses they take, what interventions they were in, and then being able to assess whether or not those interventions are successful and what other interventions we need to put in place. And again, that's consistent through all subject areas as well.
So if I look at this graph right now, 1 out of 3 kids that come to RB from our feeder schools are below the composite score of 16. Am I right?
Qualification. It's not just, this includes transfer students, right?
Correct. That's
Correct.
transfer.
Includes, so 1 out of 3 are not, are already at a deficit because they're below that. And as we talked about before, going at that 16 and to go to 21, it's easier to make that grade than, but if you're below the 16 to try to hit the 21, you've got too big of a divide to be able to get that. How do we get that skew from 1 to 3 to, reduce that? How do we do that? Because to me, as a parent, if I was a parent sitting here right now, even as a board member, that's a scary figure, 1 out of 3. That before they even start RB, 1 out of 3 are not. It's going to be, one of those 3 are going to have a hard time trying to make it to be college ready.
So one thing that we're doing is we've shared this report to our feeder schools and provided them some additional information on how their students perform, and we'll be meeting with them again in April to review that information. And some things that have come out of those meetings is stronger articulation with the curriculum. We've had some of our feeder schools adopt the same math textbook series, which then closely aligns to what we're doing. And so we're looking at ways that we can streamline what we're doing with what the feeder schools are doing so that students can come to us more prepared to be successful.
Kristen, you were able to, looks like the number of students in the population are about the same. There was only like 60% of the students in those classes. So we don't have data on the rest of them. We talked about this last time. It says it's the 2010 to 2016 graduating class, which is 8 years. There's roughly 400 students in the class. It'd be 3,200.
I think a lot of our classes from 10 were closer to 300.
Yeah.
So we think, well, 300 times 8 is 2,400, and there's only 1,900 in the
So I count
population.
I count 7 classes, and so that would be roughly 2,100. And if a student's data file isn't complete, if we didn't have both 8th grade and grade 11, we couldn't include them.
Okay, so we think it's a fair sampling of our population.
Yes, we went
Okay.
through file by file to make
Okay.
sure the files were
We
complete.
added about an additional 800, I thought, right? Or
Correct.
700 kids.
Okay.
That wasn't in the first one.
Okay.
And then one of the last pages of the report, apologize, I don't have the page number written down. I believe it's page 43, maybe?
What is it?
Yes, it's page 43. And that's just the projections to ACT by grade for our current students. And this is something that you've seen before. None of this information has changed, but just wanted to provide that for you as well. And then lastly, the second report, which is new, is looking at a sample individual student profile. And so for us at the building level, this is what we use on a regular basis. And this information is based off of the ECRA Local Growth Model, or the LGM. And that model is built off of the historical performance data of the students within RB. And so that model compares the growth of an individual student with the local growth trends of RB students with the same historical achievement on standardized tests. So individual profiles, such as this one, which is on page 44 of the board packet, assist us in monitoring student progress and monitoring the progress and successfulness of our interventions, identifying students who need additional interventions and support, and determining if interventions need to continue or if they need to be modified in any way. Next year, all teachers will have access to this student data for the students in their classes in order to differentiate instruction based off of student achievement levels, and we'll be providing teachers with additional support with incorporating more reading strategies and academic vocabulary strategies into their classroom. So I don't want to necessarily go through all of the information in this report, but I do want to highlight a few things. So one important piece of ECRA is that it provides us with a propensity score on a student. And a propensity score is really just a standardized score. So it takes all of the past achievement data on standardized tests, which are often on various different scales, and standardizes it to one score. And that score is called the propensity score, and it has a mean of 100 and a standard deviation of 16. So you can see that this student who I pulled has varying propensity scores, which is that column, of 154, 146, 153, etc. So this is one of our top students. And then based off of that propensity score, ECRA creates a projection for individual tests. And so you can see that for the fall IACT, which is our internal practice ACT, that she was projected to get a 35 on the ACT, but the next column shows that she actually received a 36. And then if you go all the way to the right, it shows a growth score. So because this student exceeded what ECRA had projected for her, which was based off of historical achievement data, she had a positive growth because she exceeded the the projected score. The other benefit of this profile, in addition to that information I just went over, is that it also compiles all of the assessment data for an individual student on one sheet. And in the past, we've been having to flip through different Excel spreadsheets to find AP test performance, ACT performance, MAP test performance, etc. Are there any questions?
So will the student counselors have this type of data with them? So as they're planning out their classes of what they're going to do, showing where you need to be able to maybe build up some strength?
Yes, counselors will also have access to the data.
Is it only valuable on an individualized basis then? I mean, is the data not valuable on a class or course or?
No, so the
Group
other thing we can do is we
basis.
can create groups and looking at, for example, we can put a group together of all of our students that were in CAP and monitor their performance, and then identify and quickly filter which students, met the ACT benchmark and which students didn't. We can do that. We can create as many groups as we want for that.
Could you do it for geometry or something and see if we're not doing too well in geometry and then see if we need to do something with our geometry course?
Yes, we could create whatever sort of group we would like.
The two focuses that we were initiating and through our discussions though was the CAP, because the board's put some money in the CAP the last couple of years, and now with the shift to SAT, we wanted to see how kids did who were in CAP, who were not in CAP. And then the other one was academic support. We were looking at how those students are growing, those who had academic support as a freshman and those who didn't have academic support as a freshman. So a lot of this time that we work with ECRA is really personalizing this data on the student level more than the holistic picture which we presented at the board meeting of all, the inclusive, the whole class or all the transfers. But those graphs are just as powerful as Kristen identified. When we obviously have to look at what's going on with our transfers is from when they come in to when they're leaving, where their lack of growth is, or what classes they're taking, or what interventions maybe they're receiving. I'll let Kylie speak to that as well.
I think one of the most valuable things in this, when Kristen talks about creating those groups, is being able twofold. As a classroom teacher, for me, I can go in and I can see all of my students, and I can look at my students who are growing positively, growing negatively, or are not experiencing growth. And that allows me at a teacher level to differentiate for my students, because I am able to see where are my students progressing normally and where are my students that aren't making progress like we would expect them to based on the ECRA model. And I'm able to make some decisions at a classroom teacher level that I've never been able to make before, because I don't necessarily have the backstory for a particular student's growth or non-growth. And now I have that wealth of information, and I'm able to drill down to a specific student level and access what my specific students are doing. From an administrator standpoint and from a more programmatic level, if I go in and, as Kristen said, apply a filter that says, I want to look at all students who didn't meet benchmarks, then I can get a list, literally a list of students, and I can see all of my students who didn't meet benchmarks. And now I know that that master list of students are students that we need to intervene with, and we need to start looking at why didn't they meet benchmarks? What's going on? What classes are they taking? Like Kristen said, what interventions are they in that need to be modified? What interventions need to be put into place? In addition to that, I can look at, like I said, I can look at students who didn't meet benchmark. I can also look at students who didn't meet their projected growth. So when ECRA tells us through the local growth model, this student, based on their traditional performance on all of these assessments that we put into the model, didn't make the growth that they should have statistically, I can start then again to look at those individual students and what is it that's not getting them to make that growth? Why are they staying stagnant, or why is their growth negative a little bit? So it gives us a way to look at student performance in a way that just physically wouldn't be possible if we were trying to run all these numbers ourselves, or trying to make a guess at what a student should get on an assessment, because we have something that tells us what they're projected to get based on their own past performance. So we're able really to tailor the services that we offer our students at a level that we would have never even imagined. I think the other thing that's important to note too is some of our high flyers, some of our kids who are coming in and they're scoring 25, 26, 27, being able to look at that group of students through that filter of not meeting projected growth and saying, what is it that our top students maybe aren't growing as much? What services do we need to offer? So it's really allowing us to look globally at our entire student population and find out how do we individually service our students who come in below that benchmark, like you were mentioning, Mr. Cindy, or our students who are coming in at benchmark and they're kind of cruising along, and those students who sometimes, in some instances, might not have that focus on them because they're meeting benchmark, so they're doing what they're supposed to do, but we want to be able to have an avenue to even push those kids. Why, we want those kids to continue growing. We don't say, once you hit benchmark, you're good. We want to continue to progress those students and keep them growing. So this information is information that can help globally, all levels, all student abilities, for us to be able to look at specific students and specific groups of students and figure out how do we intervene and support and push all of our students.
Will it also be able to help us as we're doing this one-to-one, as we're rolling out, now we're moving into year 2 next year, being able to see where we need to improve the effectiveness of the class in the one-to-one situation using the computers, and is there any way that we can use that data, see if we're effective enough or not?
I think through a program analysis, we could look, if we were, and I'm just thinking, if we were forward thinking and we looked, for example, if we tried to do a program analysis of a class like a junior English right now that is not Chromebook supported, and then we did that same program analysis when they had Chromebooks, we could do something like that. Okay. We wouldn't do the juniors because we would have to wait a whole other year. But let's say we did sophomores right now. That's something that I think we could do and look at how our kids performing within those 2 settings. The problem will be though that it'll be a different group of kids, so that might not be a perfect analysis, because you're generally looking at students and how they've traditionally performed, and so we wouldn't be able to look at we could maybe look at their progression in English 10, then to English 11. I'm just brainstorming now.
We did ask ECRA as one of the program analysis to put our one-to-one program on the list. It's just, as Dr. Zinka said, not one of our priorities for this year, given that we haven't completed a full year yet.
What are we going to do, or what can we prepare the board for now that there's going to be the shift to SAT? We'll have this year's junior class taking the ACT one more time. That would be the class of 17, which are not on this report, because do we have a plan score for them, or we do not have a plan score for them?
We do not have a plan score for them.
Because the state pulled that, correct?
Correct. And so I'll be meeting with Mary, our ECRA consultant, on April 4th. To walk through what our plan is moving forward and how we can transition in terms of monitoring student progress from traditionally looking at an ACT to looking at an SAT.
And will the board have to then shift their goals, benchmarks, to shift from ACT growth, obviously, to SAT growth? So we have to establish some norms that we'll need to look at for the board, and what targets we should be achieving in SAT growth and from the 8th grade.
Yes.
And then the Explorer test, we don't have that anymore, am I right, or do we?
We've been using a retired Explorer for the past several years, so we do have that if we choose to continue to give that for one more year for 8th grade placement.
So will the board need to purchase an entry-level 8th grade placement score that aligns with SAT?
That is one possibility, but in some capacity, the board will need to purchase additional tests in the SAT suite So looking at, there's a PSAT for grade 8, 9, 10, and then one for grade 11 before they take the one that counts as well. So we're putting together a plan for, which tests we want to give when, and working with ECRA, but there would be a cost associated with some of those tests leading up to the SAT.
And one last question. I know we're looking into this with CADCA, which is the Curriculum Directors Association. This is the first year of a 3-year contract with SAT, correct? So by the time we establish our baseline data and we put all this in place, the contract will be up for rebid with the state. And so if the board wanted to choose to keep paying for and just continue to do the ACT, is that something we can do? Or to begin to limit us because of the retired Explorer and no plan?
It significantly limits us because of the retired Explore and Plan, and then tests that we use. Additionally, the ACT costs $35 a student, approximately, without the writing portion, and we're paying for that for all juniors this year. Additionally, with the SAT, while their contract's 3 years, since we haven't heard anything from the state yet, I don't know if that is kicking in this year or if next year is going to begin the first year, since schools have not received a state-funded SAT this year.
Well,
yet.
and we really don't know whether kids are going to keep taking the ACT and just not take the SAT. I mean, that's typically been a Midwestern test, right? And so we're kind of going to uncharted waters as to what the state shift will actually mean as to what our demographic does, right?
Mhm.
Well, next year we could be required to have to give it to every junior.
Correct.
Right now, the school code, I believe, is a little vague and says that every single student before they graduate high school has to take at least one post-secondary planning test or college entrance exam. So it leaves you open as to ACT or
Well,
SAT.
that's what I'm wondering, Kevin.
Right. If they come down and say, it has to be the SAT unless you're paying for it, I mean, that's what we're gonna have to weigh.
Well, what would, the biggest concern I have is we spend a lot of money on this. We spend $35,000 a year on ECRA. We have goals set to measure growth, so we can't miss. We can't skip a year with an entry test. So whether it's a PSAT, even if we have to pay for it, you keep telling us this is the Explorer. It's 8 years old. Whether that's still valid anymore, but some decision has to be made. Because we did the Explorer for the incoming freshmen for this year again, right?
Correct.
Before we get our income, what in
November.
when do we normally give the test to the
December.
So the incoming freshmen for next year already took the
Correct.
Explorer? So we can't give them a PSAT probably now, right?
Not for grade 8, but there's a testing window,
Mhm.
and that test wasn't the SAT wasn't redesigned until March, and that's when the new test was given. And
So we could take this year's incoming freshmen and give them the grade 9 PSAT in April, when everybody else, when the juniors are testing and the sophomores are testing.
But we miss a half a year of growth then in the measurement if we wait till April, right?
There are a lot of crossovers
Okay.
that help people convert from the ACT series to the PSAT and SAT series,
There are,
and we would
okay.
rely on ECRA for that as well.
Okay.
Also, we would still give the grade 8 students some sort of standardized test. So right now in the placement process, we also use MAP scores, which are our standardized test. So if we didn't give the Explorer, we would look at giving the PSAT 8 for next year.
But my concern is that, like we've heard before, some experts are gonna come and say that's not valid. That's what my concern is. You guys are the experts, you pick what we need to do, but we don't wanna pick something in 2 years from now, have people tell the board, oh, you know what, that's not valid, which we've heard more than once about different reasons that you don't compare tests. So,
I think that's why I'm introducing that, kind of laying out there. You notice I keep saying the board may have to pay.
I
Because we'd like to
understand
get
that.
to a decision here by this summer.
No, I think it's a good investment, but I think what Tim is saying is we gotta plan carefully,
Yes.
at least as best as we can, so that it doesn't shift again.
I
and
mean, I'm
again
hesitant
and
to
again,
jump
and we don't
all in
have
on
any
SAT
statistics.
and the state pulls the rug on us again.
that I understand,
Yeah, you
but
can't do anything about
what
that.
Kristen said, makes sense to me, but before we heard something different. It seems like there should be a way to interpolate between the tests to get close. But one of the last times we were being presented, there was this, they're different tests, they're not comparable, and that's what my concern is, that we can't miss measuring the growth for any classes, since we determined so far as an administration, your recommendation, and us as a board, that's a very important feature in determining how well we're performing as a school and how well we're educating our students, right? So that, I mean, that's my only concern, that we can't miss the boat. I mean, we can't, like, not do nothing and then a year later say we don't have the baseline for when they started to measure the growth.
No, Dr. Skinkis has made it clear that whatever we do, we need to make sure that we continue to monitor student progress and growth.
Okay.
So that's a priority for us.
And I was at a presentation by the College Board, because College Board oversees SAT, and the individual that was presenting let us know that they are currently working, SAT is currently working on the concordance tables that translate the scores for their new test. They have them for the old version of the test, but since they just started the new SAT test, they are working on the concordance tables now between ACT and the new SAT.
Good.
They're not released yet, but they're working on them still.
All right, any questions on this side of the room?
Yes. How many students will take both the ACT and SAT?
It's a pretty
A
low numbers
proportion.
in SAT, right?
Currently, we have very few students that pay to take the SAT.
Okay. Is it possible to get for the board a, kind of like a chart on some of these costs, get it into our hands sooner so we can start to look at it?
I have a phone conference with the head of the Illinois region for SAT scheduled for when we return from spring break, and that is one of the primary things that I'm going to be talking to him about, is what kind of investment are we talking about right now. And I have several different scenarios that Kristen and I are working on in terms of a variety. You know, what would it cost if we tested in this window?
Right.
So I'll have that information as soon as we get back from spring break.
I mean, as you were looking at kind of a curriculum 3-year guide, just kind of including that there with the curriculum as part of that entire expense, I think makes sense.
Now, Kylie, you and I believe some of the teachers, when we've had a brief conversation, your concern about shifting from ACT to SAT was not a big one in regards to content.
No, I prefer it. I think it's better for our students. Overall, it gives a better picture of what our students can do. SAT is very linked to skill, and the resources that SAT is developing to help students progress it's linked to Khan Academy, and the resources are vast and they're all completely free to students. So much of the shift, I think, is going to benefit us from the way that we instruct students and the way that students are able to make positive progress. SAT, the way they put it is they see a score as a moment in time and something that is very changeable, if you will, something that students can grow to, whereas ACT has traditionally been seen as a snapshot of, and kind of like a who you are picture, and it feels like it's this score that's sort of tied to you for the rest of your life.
And one of the nice features about SAT is a student can log into the system and see what their score was in math, and then identify a score that they want, and then the program will identify the list of standards or content that student needs to master in order to achieve that score. So it really helps students be able to identify ways that they can improve their score on the SAT.
Any other questions on this side? Mike, do you have any questions? We'll get the delay, so anybody over on this side? I'll tell you right now, this presentation compared to what we had before, very good. And I'm very impressed with that individual student profile showing. I think that there's a lot of good stuff here, so we appreciate it. And also the dialogue on the SAT, I thought was very, very good. So
Tim, what do we pay this year to give an ACT to every junior? What, was it 36,000? So that number's roughly in the,
Well, it's $35 a student. And we have approximately 415
So-
juniors.
I'm trying to think of the budgeted amount we ended up.
I think we budgeted more than that, but
So, I mean, at least there's some budget already built in for testing. So if we went with the SAT, we could possibly use that same budget amount to purchase the PSAT 8th graders.
The preliminary information I was given about pricing for testing was that it was $10 a student, and that discounts were available depending on, how many suites you ordered in different grade levels. So that's what Kylie will be exploring. So the cost should be of testing 3 classes of students should be comparable to providing 1 class in ACT.
Okay.
So you threw out 35,000, it's nowhere near 35,000,
No, it's
right?
more like
About 14.
15, 16, but I thought we budgeted more
Well, it was $35, right?
per kid.
Times
Times 400?
14,000.
Yep.
14,000, so it's nowhere near 35,000.
I knew the number was 35, maybe, so that's.
$35,
Yeah.
yeah, so it's like 14, okay.
All right, thank you very much, I appreciate it.